Dear Tai and dear Sister Chankong, thank you for bringing us together. Dear Sangha family, thank you for showing up. I'd like to read the land acknowledgement for the Embrace Sangha, written by a Canadian. In acknowledgement of the land and the land ancestors, I welcome each of us to bring our awareness to the storiedness of the earth under our bodies. May we listen deeply to understand those stories, the causes and the conditions that got us here. And in reverence and with wholehearted gratitude, may we honor the ancestral stream, our known and unknown land ancestors, our spiritual and familial ancestors. May we contemplate the challenges, the gifts, and the responsibilities that have been transmitted to us by all the ancestors. May our learnings together on this path grow our ability to be mindfully present, support curiosity, and to feel truth, so that we may transform what needs to be transformed for a just and equitable future, so all peoples, beings, and the earth may thrive and live in peace, belonging, love, and joy. So I've had to change my Dharma talk a little bit today to be relevant and updated, but luckily it was already very relevant to our particular situation right this moment. I was going to start by talking about our nervous system and how it's constructed, and that we have this survival brain back here that keeps us going all night, whether we're conscious or unconscious, keeps our heart and our blood going and digesting our food, things we wouldn't have a clue as to how it would function, and we'd make it function if it didn't do it automatically. So that's a beautiful inheritance. And we have this limbic emotional brain network that keeps us on alert. It keeps us scanning the environment for safety and for danger. And it draws on all the things that we've experienced before. And so in this moment, it's drawing for every single one of us on our COVID experience, and the experience of others that we heard about, whether they were from our family or from the social media. So all of us has got those antennas going all the time. And we're hardwired to have that automatic response that's fight or flight, or sometimes overwhelm and shut down. And then we've got an executive functioning that if our threat system is calm enough, that executive functioning can go online to do some wise problem solving, some deep understanding. But if we're outside of that window, then we can't absorb as much. We can't make as wise decisions. We can't hear some of the safety that's around us because we hyper-focus on the fear or the anger. We've inherited this nervous system from our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and 10,000 years isn't a very long time in terms of evolution and evolutionary changes. So this is the nervous system of that has evolved to handle situations which were way less complicated from their point of view. They still had viruses. They still died of illness, but they didn't have the complicating factor of social media that bombards you with every symptom that anybody ever had and images of disaster, etc. So we have a much more complicated task with the exact same nervous system that isn't really made to deal with this. But fortunately, science has caught up with the Buddha and has figured out that there are ways that we can tweak our nervous system. We can craft it, we can fool it into having a relative enough safety so that our executive functioning can come online. So we're going to fast forward to doing that right now. And then we're going to have some announcements about the COVID that we're practicing with. It's going to be our teacher for this retreat. And we'll be putting into practice right away what we're learning. So in a way, that's kind of cool. So, we know that when we're dysregulated, we get either really jacked up or really flattened out. And those mental formations create the activation because of our perception that we're not safe. So the task is to change the perception. Tai has two wonderful slogans to help us remember. One is, you are partially right. Whatever you're thinking, you're partially right. Because you don't have a big view. And you don't get a big view when you're really uptight because you're narrowing your focus to outrun the saber-toothed tiger. Except you will not outrun the COVID virus necessarily. So the first task is how to get the body mellow enough to make that executive functioning come online. And we have many avenues. One is to feel solid, buff. And so we just focus in our body right now on the weight. We talked about the weight last night. We got a little introduction to it. Now we're going to use it. And so, notice where you feel grounded, if at all. It doesn't mean that you will find it, but be curious. Slump and then sit up straight and see if that makes you feel more resilient. Something that minor can make a difference. It's no accident that the Buddha made a big deal about sitting properly, like a tree, rooted. So feel into that. It may or may not do it for you. Play around with where you're going to put your hands. Play around if you're on a chair, whether you're leaning or you're not leaning. Just notice if there's some sensation of solidity that gives a sense of well-being, just focus there. Just make your anchor on that well-being. We're on a hunt for well-being. And then I want to challenge you to find various places on the body that feel good enough, that give also a sense of well-being, even if it's only the snugness of your hat on your head, or the fact that your knees no longer hurt when you're sitting on the floor, or the relief of sitting in a chair, or perhaps you used to have one time a toothache and now your teeth don't hurt. Focus on that. And the miracle of how did it stop hurting? The body was taking care of it. Or perhaps an old sprain that healed. Or just the strength that you feel in your upper body, being able to sit upright. Anywhere that you can appreciate the wisdom of your body. And when your mind wanders, just appreciate that it's got your back and bring it back to where you want it. And notice whether that makes any difference to your overall sense of well-being. Just noticing, is there something in my mind or my body that is changing as a result of noticing other parts of my body that are in order? And then I want to experiment with bringing to mind some sort of well-being situation. Something you've encountered, some person, place, experience, little being. If If you can't think of one, you could look at Sassy snuggled up into Kimmy's jacket. Something that brings a sense of safety or belonging or strength or mastery. So many ways to feel well-being. But bring it to mind in vivid detail, as vivid as you can. Noticing maybe what's in your mind's eye. Or who's there, or what's happening, what you're telling yourself about the situation. And what makes this so good? And notice if anything changes in your body. As you keep focused on this situation of well-being or good enoughness. Maybe there's a word that encapsulates it. Maybe you feel it in some part of your body, that putting a hand on it or keeping your focus on that part of the body. Notice what happens. Maybe nothing, but maybe something. Maybe even taking this sense of well-being, if it's arisen, and pairing it with that sense of groundedness. Noticing what happens with that. And knowing that the more you focus on this, the more strength you'll gain from it. The more sense of well-being will be available to you when you want it. So in a couple of minutes, we're going to try it out. We'll have part 2 of the Dharma talk is going to be offered by Josh, our resident physician. And I want you to continually notice what's going on in your body and your mind, and bring back this sense of well-being by imaging or putting a hand or feeling the grounding, to use that as a tool right away to continually bring yourself back into this window so that you can really absorb what Josh is saying. And not only to absorb his words, but absorb his vibes. Because this is an amazing part about being a human being, is that our bodies, if I'm focused on you, then I'm focused on your eyes and the way your cheeks are, and my cells are actually mimicking this, what I'm picking up as a sense of curiosity you're kind of leaning forward, and I'm leaning forward, and there's an ease inside of me by looking at Jason. And so we're picking up on that even when we're not aware of it. And if we're aware, we selectively water the seeds of well-being. We don't scan the room for the one frown or the two frowns. We're really focusing in on the smiles, on the ease in the body, so that we know we're safe. And so I want you to hear Josh's presentation, not only for the facts, or what we think are the facts. I didn't say the second thing that Ty says. He says, are you sure? Right? You're partially right, and are you sure? So we don't, if you remember back to the beginning of COVID, oh my gosh, it was like so many, maybe you would get it from the dog. Maybe, we would isolate ourselves and that would be helpful. We don't really know that much. We know more than we did before, and we were partially right. But we were so sure. So, pick up Josh's sense of the situation from his body and his presentation. I guess that doesn't give you much pressure, right? And Josh will do his best to bring all that up as he's offering it, but please come up and let us know what the staff Sangha is having you report on. Why don't you stand up or sit high so that everybody can really get a good view of you, to be able to co-regulate. There you go.
I think can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I did not, in my wildest dreams, imagine I'd be giving a Dharma talk on COVID. So I'll just let you know what I know and what we talked about at our meeting. So just to review the situation, one of our siblings got sick last night overnight and tested positive for COVID this morning, and she's feeling fairly ill, but I think she's going to be fine. She's getting a ride home with her spouse when he arrives, so she'll be home and taken care of there. So I guess then the question is, where does that sort of leave us? And I'll just let you know that I'm not an expert on COVID, but I'll tell you what I know. And the good news is there's quite a bit of good news actually. The good news is that the most basic things are always true, and I'll review what those are for us. And the other good news, at least I think it's good news, is that we've all been exposed already. We all spent the night in this room together last night, and we all ate together. And so for a medical perspective, we're all really at risk to the same degree. So in some sense, that helps us because I think we can know, we don't have to worry about, oh my God, do I have it or do I not have it? We've probably been exposed to a certain degree. So, yeah. So I think that's helpful. And then, so what do we do about that? So that's sort of, that's where the basics sort of come in.
Okay, so just check yourselves right now. And if you feel a little dysregulated, go back to some of that well-beingness. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Joanne. So general hygiene. So it's helpful to wash your hands after you eat and frequently when you remember. And there's some hand sanitizer around, and I think we may. There's some on the wall and there's some in the back there. And if you have your own, you can feel free to use it. We're still going to gather in group and keep the windows open, so ventilation will help as well. There'll be lots of outdoor activities today, as I understand. So that we did talk about masks. It's difficult for me to say clearly whether masks will help. As I said, I think we've all been exposed. I think we've decided as a group that we'll leave it up to you as an individual. If you feel safer wearing a mask, you're welcome to do so. But you're also equally justified in not wearing a mask if that makes you feel like you breathe easier and you feel better that way. If you want to talk to your roommates about that, I think again it's a bit of an individual decision. Again, from my perspective, the medical part of my brain says doesn't really make much of a difference. It might, but I couldn't really tell you, to be honest with you. What's important though is that, luckily enough, again, there's some good news, is that what we're practicing here is to learn how to be mindful of our nervous system. And what's connected to our nervous system is our immune system and our endocrine system and all the other systems. They're not separate systems, they're all connected. So just being mindful of whether we're developing symptoms, and the symptoms would be runny nose, sore throat, cough. It could also be nausea or stomach ache. It could be headache, and of course fever. So if you do feel like you're developing any symptoms, that could mean that you're sick. And I would say what we've decided as a group that we would ask that you find a way home where we could help you with that. Because once you're sick, then you are sort of, you're very contagious at that point. Yeah, so just, again, it's like lots of opportunity to practice checking in with yourself and whether you're well and not just physically, but, you know, psychologically, how's your nervous system, how's your mind, and I think being inside of the window is not just helpful for our stress levels and our psychology, it's also helpful for our physiology as well, because as I said, it's not separate. If you have any specific medical questions or concerns, I'm happy to talk to you and relay it to the facilitators, and we can make decisions. I have a sense from the group that there's going to be some slight changes in terms of where things will happen. I think some of the Dharma sharing groups may be moved. Maybe I'll let someone else give the announcements about that. And possibly some of our activities may be outside, but if they're inside, we're going to keep things ventilated, and we're going to keep you up to date with any other announcements. So the logistical stuff I will let someone else tell you about, and I think that's it.
So go back to that place inside and just notice again. Thank you, Josh. And was there anything that we decided that didn't get covered? So, Aldo, would you like to say a few logistical things?
We are aware that questions are likely to arise, and we'd like to just direct these. So just to go over what Josh shared, if you do have symptoms, we have decided as a group that that anyone with symptoms, if you could arrange a way to get home. If you would like to do a COVID test, we do have some available. In the meeting, sorry Josh to bring you back into this, but the COVID test at this point is optional. We don't, like Josh said, we've all been exposed. Whether we express symptoms or not is going to depend on our own immune systems, as I understand. But if you do, if it would help you to, feel better, or if for whatever reason you would like, whatever very valid reason, any reason is valid, if you'd like to take a test, we do have some. And so Brian is going to be our COVID test touch point person. So if you'd like to do that, please find Brian. He won't always be wearing a red hat, but maybe. But he knows where they are. And he can hook you up. The other thing is that if you have questions, if you do decide to go home, if you have questions about registration, if you could find Jen. So Jen's who would have greeted you when you arrived at the registration table. She will do her best to answer any questions that we have answers for. But we might not have answers until after the retreat for some of your questions. But if you are going home, please let us know, and Jen will help us to keep track of that. And I think those are the only logistical things. If you have any kind of concern, like if you need extra support, please let your Dharma family facilitator know. They aren't, they're kind of part of the organizational team Sangha body, so they're the touch point for communication. Let them know, and then they will come to the organizing organism, and we will find a way to support you, to find whatever kind of support you need. Yeah, I think that was all. And we will just update you as we go with any kind of changes to the program or meeting places or anything like that. Lucy?
It was just suggested that at lunch, if you want to meet with your roommates of your cabin, just so that you can talk. Everyone has different opinions, comfort levels. We as a organizing group just checked in with each other. How are we feeling about this? Everyone's going to be at a different space, so we just want to ask you to maybe sit with your roommates at lunch and just, after noble silence, have a chance to just share where you're at and make decisions together.
Yeah, so lunch is, just a reminder that for lunch, we're going to practice the 5 contemplations together. So you're invited to get your food and then sit down and not start eating yet. Today Rebecca will be sharing the 5 contemplations, and then we'll have one bell at some point, and then there will be 2 bells. And so after the 2 bells is when you are invited to go up and get seconds or rinse your dishes. So there's a system now with the kitchen team that there's a rinsing station for our dishes, so you can feel free to do that. And after that, we are invited to have mindful conversation. So at that point, if you would like to gather with your cabin mates and put this all into practice. So we can practice loving speech and deep listening and really share about our direct experience with what is coming up in your body, and perhaps just share about sharing space and the issue of masking and not masking, and you're able to land on consensus that everyone is comfortable with. And if you need support with that, then please let us know.
Thanks. So, back to the Dharma talk. I guess we haven't left. A number of years ago, I was introduced to neuroscience through a model called the Community Resiliency Model from the Trauma Resource Institute in Southern California. They have a combination of neuroscience and somatic experiencing approach to trauma for people who are in heavily impacted areas around the world, whether they are natural or political or ecological disasters. They go into a community that's hard hit, and they take a bunch of people who are community pillars, and they train them in this model. And the model is to help them stay in the window, to notice when you're out and stay in, so that the community can make wise decisions on how it's going to handle the disaster at hand. And I was very taken with this model because it wasn't highfalutin. It didn't have any fancy words. It didn't need to deal with dredging up bad things that had happened to you. It just dealt with the body, and it really spoke to wide audiences. So I got trained in it, and I was doing things to train my community and also children, kindergarten through 7th grade, grade 7. And as I learned the model more and more, they were saying, don't invite people to follow their breath, because when you're anxious, if you follow your breath, you're going to become more anxious, very likely. And something went off in my mind. Oh, no wonder I cannot follow my breath. And what does this mean in terms of my own practice? Because I had been practicing for a bunch of years, but kind of like an imposter, because I assumed that everybody else had much more concentration than I did. And as I looked back and looked deeply into my own practice, I realized that there were conditions in my childhood that made it really difficult for me to not become dysregulated with my breath. And so I grabbed onto this like a lifeline. And also, like, why didn't somebody say this to me earlier on in the practice so that I could handle it and understand it and not feel so removed from the Sangha? So I went on a crusade, and this is part of that crusade. And it turns out there's a lot of imposters out there. They're not imposters. They're following their heart and the Dharma. And the Dharma really covers it all, but it needs some tweaking for present day. We have one of my most wonderful images of Thai is standing in front of a flip chart in the days before dry erase came in, and he would draw this absolutely perfect circle on the paper, and then he'd make this line, very curvy line. And this was our consciousness. This was the mind consciousness above and the store consciousness below. And he would say, in the store consciousness, there are all of these seeds of our mental formations. And the ones that we water with our attention, the ones that we water manifest up into our mind consciousness. And that if we notice that the manifestation is of well-being, then we keep our focus on that. And that when that passes, that seed down there goes much stronger. But the same thing happens with those seeds of ill-being, that if we water them by rah, 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 or that when it goes down, it is also stronger and has more likelihood of coming up in the future. So what's the deal is you have to know whether it's a manifestation of well-being or ill-being. And the way we know that, there's subtle signals in our body. Sometimes they're not so subtle, but often they are. Like this morning we went around and we said, what number activation were we? And I thought, I wonder if people are activated just by having to answer that question. And whether there's a pressure to be, I'm fine with it, you know. So those messages are much more subtle, but not any less important. So that's why we practice being in our body, to notice the subtle messages. If we're running around all the time, those subtle messages get lost. We can hear the big ones, but that's almost too late. We want to catch our mindfulness well within the window and keep ourselves in the window. But if we're right up against the line, chances are the slightest thing will flip us out. So we develop a lifestyle that's slower and that's constantly bringing us back in, with resources of well-being, whether that's well-being in our body, well-being in our mind, or just like hunting around for those other humans or resources that are out in our environment. We develop a lifestyle of watching for those wholesome seeds to come up. And we also need to be aware of what our capacity is, because when those unwholesome seeds come up, when the ill-being arises, the idea is that we surround that ill-being with our mindfulness and we go, aha, that is not wholesome. I am going to breathe, or whatever. My angel is here. Where are you? Could I get some water? Thank you. Every little cough. Right? Every little one. So, could be anything, like the smoke. Am I sure? Okay. So, we've got the ill being. The idea is to surround it with our mindfulness and be curious about it. And we're going to get into that tomorrow. Right now, we're not wanting to focus on that. We want to know, do I have mindfulness at all right now in order to invite my attention to go around that ill being? Or do I need to protect myself by, on purpose, calling up those wholesome seeds and putting my attention there? So the task is to be measuring our capacity for mindfulness. If it isn't strong, then we strengthen it. Thank you so much. We strengthen it by calling up those wholesome seeds. And sometimes those are like asking for help. You know, that, hey, I've got somebody who can do that for me. And so rather than just take the water, I want to spend a few breaths being grateful for it. Being grateful that it's potable, being grateful that I got it, being grateful that it was organized to have somebody support me. So that's, again, watering those wholesome seeds. That's what today is about. It's about watering the wholesome seeds individually and collectively. That this can be an opportunity for us to really bond with those people that are in our living spaces and to take care of each other and to be vulnerable enough to let other people know how we're doing and how we like to be taken care of. You know, those 5 languages of love. So let us think on that for a moment. This morning we read the discourse on happiness, and there were bunches of things that you could do to plump up those wholesome seeds. And I strongly suggest that we have some time during the day, perhaps the beginning of Dharma sharing, where we can read those again. In the Anapanasati Sutra, one of the most foundational sutras of our lineage, even though it's a Vipassana, a Theravadan sutra, Thai wasn't clinging to one lineage. He felt that this was one of the greatest treasures that he had come across in his life. And it's so fascinating because the trajectory of that sutra is to notice your breath, get in touch with your whole body, learn how to calm it, and then gladden it. And then you could deal with the difficulties. And then he went on to do the same thing with the mind. You know, notice it, calm it, gladden it, resourcing. So all that beginning of the sutra, almost all of it, is on watering the wholesome seeds and how to help the body and the mind have a sense of well-being. And then dig into the difficult stuff. And that the current leading edge of trauma therapy, does the very same thing. It starts out with being able to have a sense of safety and ease before you start talking about what brought you here. Like this? She probably wants that. This afternoon, we'll have an opportunity to play around with these notions of resourcing. We're going to resource by being outside, by doing some trippy art, and playing, not like creating beauty. One of the sad things I think about our culture is that we've made this division between amateur and professional. A professional is somebody who's really making money at the thing. An amateur is someone who does it for love. Amor. That's the root of the word amateur. And we have, as a culture, decided that if we love art but we don't like what we produce, then we shouldn't do it. We've really turned it upside down. So I strongly encourage you that if you kind of like writing or poetry or scribbling colors or wallowing in the dirt, that's what you had in mind, right? If you can scrape through the frost, yes, that you try something that you stretch, because it's one thing to constantly bring ourselves back into that window, but we're not heading for the absolute middle bliss. Bliss is a great place, if you can get there, to revitalize, renew yourself, and take a break, and just enjoy. But it also, when we're in bliss, it makes us very sensitive to getting out of the bliss. And so, like, things that they're good enough, become aversions. Oh, well, I've got to have, people used to enjoy coffee, now they got to have the best coffee, and with the best maker, or they can't enjoy the coffee anymore, right? And that's true of everything in our lives. So it's a middle way. We try and stay in the window, but not too much, or we become brittle. And the COVID is, at this point, helping us maybe deal with things that will be more challenging further down the line. After the workshops today, we're going to have Dharma sharing. And Dharma sharing is an art. And it's highly, I think, like many Zen things, Zen wants you to experience it and get it on a cellular level. But I want to explain more about a kind of a neuroscience hit on Dharma sharing. First off is that trauma, I've maybe said this before, but it's worth repeating daily, is not just the big bad thing that happened to you, because most people can handle the big bad thing that happens to them if they have enough emotional support and enough physical support, but mostly emotional. What's really traumatizing is our aloneness. We are not made to be alone. And we're not alone, but we live in that illusion a tremendous amount of the time. So Dharma sharing is a place where we talk about our practice and how our practice is helping or being challenging to deal with our ill-being. So when we're sharing as a sharer, what's really beneficial is that the rest of the group is really present. And present with an open and loving heart. However you can step up to that. And so the practice of the listener is to be non-judging and open, and being remembering if you have judgments arise, maybe you're partially right, or are you sure? And so you're working hard as the listener almost all of the time in Dharma sharing. And then the person who's sharing has their own window. Their window may be very large, where they can handle a lot of emotion and still be quite regulated. Or they may have a very narrow window in which the slightest telling of a story might throw them out of the window. And in a retreat like this, where we don't know each other, that's an art to feel out just how much for you to share and how much it will be impacting others. That's not your problem, right? But others need to be taking care of themselves because you're co-regulating. So if the person is sharing something and you're like this inside, that's a feedback loop. So your job is to constantly be bringing yourself back in. And the job of the facilitator is to have a sense of the group, and when the group needs as a whole to take a pause. And so when you hear the sound of the bell, that's merely that the Sangha facilitator, the Dharma sharing facilitator, may themselves be dysregulated, may think that the group is dysregulated, may think that the person who's sharing may need a little pause to re-regulate themselves. So it's a support. And that's why we do it periodically. So we can constantly check back in. Are we in the window? That's what the bell of mindfulness is for. Are we being mindful? Are we maintaining our ability, our capacity to be mindful? And as Zen practitioners, we do not give feedback. We do not try and fix anybody. But sometimes we err on being neutral-faced. And that's kind of unsettling as well. So how do we not fix, not advise, but be with a person? Is we can, or say thank you to them for sharing. That's okay. We don't talk about, we don't refer to their particular situation while we're in Dharma sharing. We also don't ask to talk to that person afterwards unless they say it's okay. but we don't abandon them with stone face either. We really try and be present. And in that process, a person can have a sense of accompaniment. Finally, perhaps, for the first time. And that is also very healing. Because that may have been missing at the time that whatever it was difficult, was happening. So you'll have homework for tomorrow, which is to find at least 3 things in your day that were resources, and to stop and savor them when they're happening, and to look at them in great detail and curiosity. It can be a leaf falling from a tree, or the sparkle of the frost. It can be the delight of watching 2 people smile at each other. It doesn't have to be your own smile. Just finding 3 resources that you didn't expect. It occurred to me that, we're pretty sophisticated animals. The kind of evolution of our brains is fairly phenomenal. But everything has actually been evolving for the very same amount of time. A tree or an amoeba, they might have found a really good niche and they didn't need to change much, but they have been navigating survival just as long as humans, perhaps even longer. So, the dog has something like 400 times the ability to smell that we do. That's amazing. Who knows what a dog experiences of the present moment when they're sniffing? That's amazing. But everything out there has an amazing number of qualities that, if we really focus and maintain our curiosity, we'll be wowed all day long. So another one of Ty's famous quotes is, there's always enough conditions for happiness. Always. But we have to be watching for them and spend enough time with them to see them. So that's what we'll be doing today. And I want to give some time for questions or comments, not about the COVID, but about our practice and about what's come up in the Dharma talk today about resourcing or about our nervous system.
I have a question about noble silence.
Uh-huh.
So, I know we're supposed to be quiet, but what if you're doing an activity that's louder, like you wanted to mindfully, shoot hoops or something in the morning? Is that an option?
An option to shoot hoops? So then it's not for me to notice, because I'm not you. So if you feel like shooting hoops, stop for a moment and ask yourself, what's going on in my body? Hoops is a strategy for meeting some kind of need. what's going on, that you want to do hoops. And then you decide, is that something that's watering a wholesome seed, or is it maybe trying to get away from being uncomfortable, not knowing what to do? You just pick it apart. You be curious about it. And then you do whatever you can do, whatever you choose. There are no Dharma police. Nobody is watching you anymore. I have been in winter retreats where they took attendance, and you could get in trouble, but no more. Because once you're in trouble, then you're you're paying attention to the fear or the limbic system, the emotional system, and it impedes your ability to be mindful. So we try and take all that away and leave it up to you. No rule. Except don't talk. Josh?
So I have like a little cynic in my brain that's quite loud, and even when I find a resource that works for me, sometimes that little voice can pipe up and start talking about how it might be unfortunate or sad or something else. And I think you've given advice about if a resource has some tinges of negative feelings
yes,
in it,
thank you.
what do you advise if that comes up? Like if it's initially positive, but then sadness or anger
Right.
or something.
Right. Thank you for mentioning that. And just to sidestep that for a second, is that this is a Sangha process. This Dharma talk isn't in isolation, like, oh, this is what I think I forgot that. And so I depend on you for asking questions or bringing it up to make this more whole. So, yeah, a resource, a mixed resource. Perhaps my grandma was my resource, and my grandma has recently passed. And when I bring up this wonderfulness, I just can't, the bittersweet part overpowers it. And so I set that aside for this moment. That doesn't mean I don't use that at some point when I've worked through more of my grief. And grief is a very important thing to recognize and to work through, or it will maintain. So we set that aside for the moment. If we're looking for a resource to buoy us up, if we're looking for a resource, we are resilient and we want to deal with the grief, fine, we deal with the grief. But in this context for today, we're looking for resources that are completely without that extra spin on them. If we look deep, everything has all of that, right? So we're not saying so much that there are things that are purely delightful, because everything is impermanent. So if we focus on that, that takes away from the ability to use that thing at this moment as a resource. These things that I'm talking about are for the purpose of keeping us regulated, not keeping us avoiding difficulties. They're inviting the difficulties when we have the capacity. When we have the capacity, we deal with them, and that stretches our window. When we don't have the capacity and we try and deal with them, it shrinks our window. So knowing our capacity and then choosing the right moment to put our attention in one place or another is wise effort. Yeah.
Thank you. I think this is a bit of a follow-up. When I watched the Queen Retreat video, I noticed a bit of aversion to the resource exercise on my part. And I think that's now because I have been thinking of the resource as something like that's sort of external to me. And that felt, like, oh, I don't want to need this thing that's separate from me. But the way you're describing it, is it more appropriate to think of resourcing as this verb, right? So it's not like your resource is that warm sensation exactly, but it's your capacity to be tapping in more skillfully to that as needed.
Yeah. A bow is not a resource either, right? But if I bow to you and I bring up a sense of interbeing, and I bow to that in you and in me, then this is external, but the mind state, the heart place, is internal. And that's what we're really developing. We're developing those wholesome seeds. We're watering the wholesome seeds. And that's a way for us to get in touch with it. And there's really the boundary between inside and outside. What is that? Yeah. And so even in your thinking of, oh, I don't want to use a tree. So where is the tree's exhalation? It's all of what we're doing is not only a way to transcend our suffering or to metabolize our suffering, but to feel the interbeing nature. That's our order, the order of interbeing. The 5 mindfulness trainings, those are all nice rules for how we're supposed to conduct ourselves, but ultimately they're to give us a sense of interbeing, always. To be in the ultimate dimension as well as in the historical. So that's a wonderful question. Thank you. We have time for one more comment.
I was reflecting on the heating event and our practice with that yesterday, and I noticed that it has become a resource for mindfulness, and it made me wonder about that idea of neurons that fire together wire together, and how anything really, if we are open to it, can be that relationship that we have, that in itself can be a resource. But I'm curious, what is the seed then? Is it the relationship that we're trying to have with that?
Well, if it were me, and I were listening to that, and I didn't like it yesterday, but I had discovered it's a resource for me today, then for me, in this moment, it would be, I guess, a sense of inspiration that I am so much more resilient than I give myself credit for, and that I have now a different relationship with that sound, and it's helping me to realize that I can have a different relationship with all sorts of my suffering. And that's really what we're trying for when we have a aversive relationship and we're trying to embrace it. So that's a reminder. That's watering the wholesome seed of equanimity. Yeah. stretching that window. So I invite you to just sit for a moment, notice what's going on inside. And perhaps there's one nugget that you might take away from this time together this morning. And to bring it to mind in detail, to develop it as a resource, or something you want to remember for being curious about it later. You might not find anything. That's okay too. You might just be excited about going out and finding some more resources, perhaps on our walking meditation. Notice if that's making any impact inside. Remembering to go slow. Notice the subtleties. Greet them with curiosity. You can stretch your legs. Alda, are there any announcements needed?
I don't think so. I mean, what's next?
Where's the
It's-
walking meditation?
Oh, the gazebo?
So we'll be meeting by the gazebo for walking meditation in 15 minutes. At the next sound of the bell, everyone will stand. At the next sound of the bell, we'll bow to each other. At the next sound of the bell, we will offer the merit that we cumulatively